There exists upon this earth a creature so deeply woven into the fabric of human civilization that to trace its story is to trace our own. The horse, that magnificent, breathing paradox of fragility and power, of wildness and loyalty, has galloped through every chapter of human ambition, warfare, agriculture, art, and spiritual longing. To study the horse is to open a window not merely into zoology, but into the very architecture of the world we have built together, species and species, stride by stride, across millennia uncounted. What follows is not simply a natural history. It is a meditation on partnership, on the extraordinary, almost inexplicable convergence of two very different kinds of intelligence that between them reshaped continents, toppled empires, fed nations, and painted some of the most luminous images ever pressed into cave walls or stretched upon canvas. Breathe slowly. Listen carefully. The story of the horse is about to begin. The evolutionary origins of the horse reach back approximately 55 million years, to a creature so unlike the animal we recognize today that early paleontologists hesitated to draw the connection at all. This ancestral form, known as Eohippus, or more formally Hyracotherium, was a small, forest-dwelling mammal roughly the size of a fox, possessing multiple toes on each foot and teeth designed for browsing soft, leafy vegetation rather than cropping the tough grasses that would eventually define its descendants' diet. Discovered first in the Eocene deposits of North America and Europe, Hyracotherium lived in the dappled shade of subtropical forests, moving quietly through undergrowth, relying on agility rather than speed for survival. Its spine was arched, its back flexible, and its brain relatively modest in proportion to what would come. Yet within this unassuming creature lay the genetic blueprint for one of the most dramatic evolutionary transformations the mammalian record has ever preserved. A transformation that would unfold across tens of millions of years of shifting climates, retreating forests, and the slow, irresistible expansion of open grassland across the interior of continents. The fossil record of equid evolution is among the most complete and instructive in all of paleontology, offering scientists an almost unbroken chain of morphological change spanning 5 decades of geological time. Following Hyracotherium, a succession of genera, Orohippus, Epihippus, Mesohippus, Myohippus, Parahippus, and eventually Merychippus, document the gradual elongation of the limbs, the reduction in toe number, and the progressive deepening and complexity of the cheek teeth. Merychippus, which lived during the Miocene epoch approximately 15 to 17 million years ago, represents something of a pivotal threshold in this lineage. It was among the first equids to develop high-crowned, hypsodont teeth capable of grinding the abrasive silica-rich grasses that were expanding across North American plains. This dietary shift was not merely a dental curiosity, it was a gateway, an adaptation that unlocked an entire new ecological niche and set the horse lineage on its trajectory toward the open savanna and steppe environments that would define it for millions of years to come. The reduction of the horse's lateral toes, that long, slow compression from 4 functional digits to 3 and eventually to 1, is one of evolutionary biology's most celebrated case studies in functional adaptation responding to environmental pressure. As forests gave way to open grassland, the selective advantages of running swiftly over firm, open ground became increasingly decisive. Multiple toes, while useful for navigating soft forest floor or uneven terrain, introduced mechanical inefficiency in a creature whose survival increasingly depended on outrunning predators across consolidated substrate. The single remaining digit, the third toe, became encased in an ever-thickening, ever more rigid structure of keratinized tissue that we now call the hoof. The lateral digits did not vanish instantaneously. They persisted for millions of years as diminishing splints of bone flanking the central cannon bone, vestigial remnants of a bodily plan superseded by geological circumstance. In modern horses, these remnants, the splint bones, can still be palpated along the inner and outer surfaces of the lower leg, quiet structural echoes of ancestors who once walked the Eocene forest floor on spreading, multi-toed feet. By the time the genus Pliohippus emerged during the Pliocene epoch, approximately 5 million years ago, the horse lineage had effectively achieved its modern single-toed architecture. Pliohippus is widely regarded as a likely ancestor of the genus Equus, the lineage that encompasses all living horses, zebras, asses, and onagers. Equus itself appeared approximately 4 million years ago, originating in North America before undertaking one of the most consequential migrations in mammalian history, crossing the Bering Land Bridge into Asia and subsequently spreading across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. This geographic dispersal produced a radiation of equid species adapted to diverse ecological conditions, from the cold steppe grasslands of Siberia to the scorched savannas of eastern Africa. Remarkably, while the genus thrived on nearly every continent it colonized, it disappeared entirely from the Americas approximately 10,000 years ago, likely a consequence of the combined pressures of climate change at the close of the Pleistocene epoch and the arrival of human hunters whose hunting efficiency was devastating to megafauna unaccustomed to bipedal predators. The extinction of horses from the Americas at the close of the Pleistocene stands as one of natural history's most poignant and scientifically provocative episodes. For tens of millions of years, the horse lineage had been quintessentially a North American phenomenon, evolving there, diversifying there, and ultimately departing into the wider world through the intermittent land bridge that connected Alaska to Siberia during periods of glacial sea level depression. Then, within what appears to be a geologically brief window between 12,000 and 10,000 years before present, every equid species on the American continents vanished. The precise mechanism remains actively debated among paleontologists, archaeologists, and climate scientists. The overkill hypothesis, championed most forcefully by the late Paul Martin, attributes the extinction primarily to the arrival of Clovis culture human hunters, whose novel and highly effective projectile technologies encountered megafauna with no evolved fear of bipedal predators. Others emphasize the simultaneous disruption of plant communities caused by rapid deglaciation, which may have destabilized the grass-dominated ecosystems upon which these large grazers depended, weakening populations to the point where any additional pressure became catastrophic. The genus Equus encompasses a fascinating diversity of species whose evolutionary relationships have been substantially refined in recent decades through the application of ancient DNA analysis and genomic sequencing techniques that would have seemed like science fiction to earlier generations of naturalists. Among the living equids, the domestic horse, Equus ferus cabalis, and the Przewalski's horse, Equus ferus Przewalski, are the most closely related, sharing a common ancestor within the relatively recent past. The plains zebra, Equus quagga, the Grevy's zebra, Equus grevii, and the mountain zebra, Equus zebra, form a distinctly African radiation, while the onager, Equus hemianus, and the African wild ass, Equus africanus, occupy the arid regions of Central Asia and Northeast Africa respectively. Each of these species represents a distinct evolutionary solution to the challenge of surviving as a large-bodied herbivore in open or semi-open environments characterized by seasonal resource variability, predation pressure, and the need for sustained locomotive efficiency across considerable distances. Their shared anatomical blueprint, the single hoof, the elongated limb, the large fermentation chamber, speaks to the power of convergent selective pressure acting upon a common ancestral inheritance. Przewalski's horse occupies a position of extraordinary scientific significance in the study of equid evolution, representing the last surviving truly wild horse lineage never subjected to the domestication process that transformed its close relative into humanity's most consequential animal partner. Named after the Russian explorer Nikolai Przewalski, who encountered animals of this type in the Dzungarian steppes of Central Asia during the late 19th century, the species had already been reduced to critically low numbers by the time Western science formally documented it. By 1969, Przewalski's horse had become extinct in the wild, a casualty of competition with domestic livestock, hunting, and the degradation of steppe habitat. The subsequent decades witnessed a remarkable conservation effort centered on captive breeding programs maintained at zoos across Europe and North America, which eventually accumulated sufficient genetic diversity to support a reintroduction program. Beginning in the 1990s, small herds were returned to protected reserves in Mongolia and China, and the species now maintains a small but growing wild population in the Hustai National Park and the Kalamali Nature Reserve. Genomic analysis has revealed that Przewalski's horses diverged from the ancestors of domestic horses between 38,000 and 72,000 years ago, establishing them as a genuinely distinct lineage rather than feral descendants. The domestication of the horse is one of the most transformative events in the entirety of human prehistory, a development whose reverberations reshaped economies, warfare, communication, and cultural exchange across every inhabited continent within the span of a few thousand years. The current archaeological and genomic consensus places the initial domestication event in the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the vast grassland corridor stretching from present-day Ukraine and Russia eastward toward Kazakhstan, somewhere around 3500 to 4000 BC. The site of Botay in northern Kazakhstan has yielded some of the earliest compelling physical evidence of horse domestication, including skeletal remains showing patterns of dental wear consistent with bitting, lipid residues from mare's milk in ceramic vessels suggesting the practice of milking domesticated mares, and the spatial organization of settlement patterns consistent with corralling. However, subsequent genomic studies complicated this picture considerably, demonstrating that Botay horses were not the ancestors of the modern domestic horse lineage, but rather of the Przewalski's horse, suggesting that domestication may have occurred independently in multiple locations, or that the Botay domestication experiment was ultimately superseded by a different population from further west. The genomic revolution in archaeology has fundamentally transformed our understanding of when, where, and how the horse was domesticated, replacing a patchwork of ambiguous physical evidence with precise molecular data capable of resolving questions that centuries of traditional archaeology could not definitively answer. A landmark 2021 study published in the journal Nature, authored by an international consortium of researchers led by Ludovic Orlando at the University of Toulouse, analyzed ancient DNA from 273 horses spanning the last 10,000 years from across Eurasia. Their analysis revealed a dramatic population replacement event approximately 2200 BCE, in which a single horse population originating in the western Pontic-Caspian steppe, associated with the archaeological culture known as the Yamnaya, rapidly spread its genetic signature across the entirety of the Eurasian continent within just a few centuries. This population, characterized by a set of genetic variants associated with docility, a strong back suitable for bearing weight, and elevated pain tolerance, effectively displaced all previously existing local horse populations across Europe and Asia. The speed and geographic scope of this replacement suggests that these horses possessed a combination of behavioral and physical traits that made them dramatically more suitable for human purposes than the animals they supplanted. The Yamnaya people of the Pontic-Caspian steppe represent one of the most consequential and archaeologically dramatic cultures in all of prehistoric Eurasia, a mobile, pastoralist society whose expansion between approximately 3000 and 2500 BC left genetic and linguistic signatures detectable across populations stretching from Ireland to the Indian subcontinent. Central to the success and velocity of this expansion was almost certainly the horse, which provided these steppe peoples with a revolutionary capacity for rapid, sustained long-distance movement across the open grassland environments in which they specialized. The relationship between the Yamnaya and their horses appears to have been intimate and multifaceted, encompassing not merely transportation but also milking, meat consumption, and likely ritual significance. Horse bones appear prominently in Yamnaya burial assemblages, often interred alongside human remains in the elaborate earthen mound burials known as kurgans. The linguistic descendants of the Yamnaya eventually gave rise to the Proto-Indo-European language family, from which Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, and ultimately the vast majority of modern European and South Asian languages descend. The very word for horse in many of these descendant languages, hippos in Greek, equus in Latin, ashva in Sanskrit, shares a common etymological root, a whisper across 5,000 years of linguistic evolution connecting every speaker to those first riders on the steppe. The physical anatomy of the modern horse is a study in the elegance of evolutionary optimization. Every structure, every proportion, every physiological system bearing the unmistakable signature of millions of years of selective pressure favoring endurance, speed, and metabolic efficiency in open country environments. The horse's skeleton comprises approximately 205 bones, though this number varies slightly between individuals due to variation in the number of lumbar vertebrae and the presence or absence of ergots, small keratinized remnants on the fetlock joints. The vertebral column, while superficially resembling that of other large mammals, is relatively inflexible through the lumbar region compared to many contemporaries, an adaptation that transfers the powerful contractile force of the hindquarters more efficiently into forward propulsion rather than allowing energy to dissipate through spinal flexion. The ribs, typically 18 pairs, enclose a thoracic cavity of exceptional volume, housing lungs capable of processing up to 60 liters of air per breath during intense exercise. This respiratory capacity is directly coupled to the locomotor cycle through a phenomenon known as locomotor respiratory coupling, in which each stride mechanically drives a breath, allowing the horse to sustain aerobic effort with remarkable efficiency across distances that would exhaust most large terrestrial mammals. The horse's respiratory system is architecturally and functionally extraordinary, representing one of the most efficient biological gas exchange mechanisms among terrestrial vertebrates of comparable body mass. Unlike humans and many other mammals who can breathe through either mouth or nose depending on metabolic demand, horses are obligate nasal breathers, anatomically incapable of breathing through the mouth due to the positioning of their soft palate, which creates a permanent seal between the oral and respiratory passages. This constraint, which might superficially appear to be a limitation, is in fact an adaptation that ensures the warming, humidification, and filtration of inhaled air even at the extreme respiratory rates demanded by galloping. During intense exercise, a horse's respiratory rate can reach 150 breaths per minute, perfectly synchronized with the 4-beat canter or the 2-beat gallop through the mechanical coupling between thoracic compression and stride dynamics. The nasal passages themselves are equipped with elaborate turbinate bones, scroll-like projections of thin bone covered in highly vascularized mucous membrane that maximize the surface area available for heat and moisture exchange, protecting delicate alveolar tissue from the desiccating effects of large volume, rapid airflow. The horse's nostrils, capable of enormous dilation during exercise, are among the most expressive and diagnostically informative anatomical features available to an experienced equine observer. The horse's cardiovascular system is proportionally among the largest and most powerful of any terrestrial mammal relative to body mass, a biological investment that reflects the extraordinary circulatory demands of sustained high-speed locomotion. The equine heart, which in exceptional individuals such as the legendary racehorse Secretariat has been documented to weigh in excess of 10 kilograms, more than twice the average, functions as a supremely efficient muscular pump capable of delivering oxygen-rich blood to working muscles at rates that sustain galloping speeds of 65 kilometers per hour or more over short distances. A fascinating and physiologically unique feature of the equine cardiovascular system is the horse's capacity to store a substantial reserve of oxygen-carrying red blood cells in the spleen, an organ that in horses functions as a dynamic reservoir rather than merely a lymphatic filter. During exercise, the spleen contracts under sympathetic nervous system stimulation, releasing up to 12 liters of concentrated red cell suspension into the circulation and dramatically increasing blood oxygen-carrying capacity within seconds. This splenic contraction, virtually absent in humans and most other mammals, allows horses to achieve aerobic capacities during exercise that their resting blood parameters would not predict. An elegant physiological solution to the challenge of maintaining tissue oxygenation during the sudden, intense metabolic demands of flight from a predator. The musculoskeletal architecture of the horse's lower limb represents one of the most sophisticated and elegant biomechanical solutions in the vertebrate world, a system designed with almost architectural precision to store and release elastic energy during locomotion, minimizing the metabolic cost of each stride while maximizing mechanical advantage and ground contact force. Below the knee and hock, the horse's legs contain almost no muscle tissue whatsoever. Instead, the movement of the distal limb is controlled by long tendons that originate from powerful muscles positioned high in the upper leg and forearm, transmitting contractile force downward through fibrous cords that act as biological levers. The superficial and deep digital flexor tendons, along with the suspensory ligament and the specialized check ligament system, function during weight bearing as springs, storing elastic strain energy as they stretch under load and returning a substantial fraction of that energy during the propulsive phase of each stride. The ratio of elastic energy recovery in the equine lower limb has been estimated at approximately 40%, meaning that for every joule of energy invested in deforming these elastic structures during stance, approximately 4/10 of a joule is returned to propulsion essentially for free, a passive energy economy that enables horses to trot at moderate speeds with remarkably low metabolic expenditure relative to their body mass. The hoof, that remarkable structure of densely keratinized tissue that both terminates and defines the equine limb, is far more complex in its internal anatomy and functional physiology than its hard, apparently monolithic exterior suggests. The outer wall of the hoof, the periopal, and the white line are composed of tubular and intertubular horn produced by specialized epithelial cells at the coronary band, the junction between hoof and living skin at the top of the foot. Internally, the hoof encloses a rich vascular network, the coffin bone, os pedis or distal phalanx, the navicular bone, the deep digital flexor tendon, and the digital cushion, a fibrofatty structure that functions as a biological shock absorber, deforming under impact to dissipate concussive forces that would otherwise be transmitted destructively up the limb. The frog, that V-shaped structure visible on the solar surface of the hoof, participates actively in this shock absorption process and also functions as a passive venous pump. Its compression during weight-bearing assists in propelling blood back up the limb against gravity, partially compensating for the absence of muscular tissue in the lower leg that might otherwise assist venous return. The health and geometry of the hoof is inseparably linked to the health of the entire horse, a fact understood intuitively by centuries of farriers long before veterinary science could articulate the underlying mechanisms. The horse's vision is shaped by an ocular anatomy profoundly different from our own, reflecting the evolutionary pressures of a prey species that must simultaneously monitor a wide arc of potential threat while navigating complex terrain at speed. Horses possess the largest eyes of any terrestrial mammal, proportionally enormous globes positioned laterally on either side of the skull, providing a monocular visual field approaching 350 degrees. This panoramic surveillance capacity comes at a cost. The zone of true binocular vision, in which the visual fields of both eyes overlap sufficiently to permit accurate depth perception, is relatively narrow, extending only a few degrees directly in front of the horse's nose. Behind the head and immediately in front of the forehead, horses maintain blind spots where no visual information reaches the brain at all, a fact of considerable practical importance for anyone working in close proximity to these animals. The equine retina contains an elevated concentration of rod photoreceptors relative to cones, conferring exceptional sensitivity in low-light conditions. Horses can navigate effectively in near-total darkness that would completely defeat human visual acuity. A reflective tapetum lucidum behind the retina further amplifies available light, giving the horse's eyes their characteristic ethereal gleam in torchlight or flashlight, and enabling the pre-dawn and post-dusk activity that was presumably advantageous during the hours when large feline predators were most active. The horse's auditory system is a marvel of anatomical refinement, equipped with large, mobile pinnae, the external ear structures, that can rotate independently through an arc of approximately 180 degrees under precise muscular control. This mobility allows the horse to direct each ear independently toward different sound sources, effectively triangulating the origin of a sound with considerable precision without moving the head. A horse can monitor sounds approaching from two completely different directions simultaneously, a capacity with obvious survival value for an animal that must remain alert to predator approach while also attending to the vocalizations of herd members positioned elsewhere in its visual field. The auditory range of horses extends both below and above the human range. They can detect frequencies from approximately 14 Hz at the low end to approximately 33,500 Hz at the high end, compared to the human range of roughly 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. This extended frequency range, particularly at the higher end, allows horses to detect the ultrasonic components of certain vocalizations and environmental sounds that are entirely imperceptible to unassisted human hearing. The ears are also among the most important channels of emotional expression in the horse. Their position, orientation, and the tension of the surrounding musculature provide experienced observers with a remarkably detailed readout of the animal's attentional state, emotional arousal, and social orientation at any given moment. Equine olfaction is a sensory modality whose sophistication and centrality to the horse's social and ecological life is easily underestimated by observers accustomed to interpreting the world primarily through visual channels. The horse's olfactory system encompasses both the primary olfactory epithelium, a richly innervated tissue lining the posterior nasal passages that detects volatile chemical compounds dissolved in the nasal mucus, and the vomeronasal organ, or Jacobson's organ, a pair of blind-ended chemosensory structures located in the roof of the mouth that detect non-volatile chemical signals, including the pheromones involved in reproductive communication. The behavioral manifestation of vomeronasal stimulation is the flamen response, that distinctive curling of the upper lip that exposes the opening of the incisive duct and facilitates the passage of chemical information to the organ. A behavior observed in stallions examining the urine of mares but also in horses of both sexes encountering novel olfactory stimuli. Horses use olfactory information to identify individual conspecifics, assess reproductive status, detect predators, evaluate food and water quality, and navigate familiar territories whose chemical landscape they have learned through repeated experience. Mares and foals establish olfactory bonds within hours of birth, and the scent of a familiar companion has measurable physiological effects, reducing heart rate and cortisol levels in isolated horses, demonstrating the deeply biological nature of the olfactory social bond. The thermoregulatory physiology of the horse represents another dimension of this animal's remarkable adaptive sophistication, enabling it to maintain core body temperature within a narrow functional range across environmental conditions spanning from the deep cold of Siberian steppe winters to the extreme heat of desert and tropical environments. Horses thermoregulate primarily through sweating, an evaporative cooling mechanism shared with humans but relatively uncommon among other large mammals, most of which rely instead on panting or peripheral vasodilation. Equine sweat is notably different from human sweat in its biochemical composition, containing a protein called lathyrin that functions as a biological detergent, reducing the surface tension of sweat and facilitating its spread through the dense coat to the skin surface where evaporation can occur. This accounts for the characteristic frothy appearance of sweat on a heavily worked horse, particularly in areas of mechanical friction such as between the forelegs and chest. In cold environments, horses can erect individual coat hairs through piloerection, increasing the depth of the insulating air layer trapped within the coat, and can concentrate metabolic heat production through shivering thermogenesis. The winter coat of horses native to cold climates is dramatically thicker and longer than the summer coat, a seasonal transition controlled by photoperiod rather than temperature, ensuring that the coat change begins in anticipation of seasonal shifts rather than in response to them. The digestive system of the horse is a study in evolutionary adaptation to a diet of nutritionally dilute, fibrous, abrasive plant material, a dietary specialization that places extraordinary demands on fermentative capacity, processing time, and the anatomical volume available for microbial digestion. Unlike cattle, sheep, and other ruminants that digest cellulose by fermenting ingested material in a foregut chamber before it passes to the small intestine, horses are hindgut fermenters. Microbial breakdown of structural carbohydrates occurs primarily in the large intestine, and particularly in the cecum, a large blind-ended sac at the junction of the small and large intestines. This hindgut fermentation strategy is in some respects less efficient than the ruminant foregut approach. Microbially produced nutrients from fermentation become available to the animal only after passing the small intestine, the primary site of nutrient absorption, meaning that horses cannot absorb a fraction of the fermentation products that ruminants recover. To compensate for this relative inefficiency, horses process very large volumes of forage. A 500-kilogram horse typically consumes between 10 and 15 kilograms of dry matter daily and maintain near-continuous feeding activity, spending between 16 and 18 hours per day grazing when free-ranging access to pasture permits. The equine stomach is relatively small in proportion to body size, designed for this trickle-feeding strategy rather than for the large, infrequent meals that carnivores or browsing megafauna might consume. The social intelligence of horses is an area of scientific inquiry that has expanded dramatically in recent decades, revealing cognitive and emotional capacities that challenge earlier, reductive characterizations of these animals as stimulus-response machines governed primarily by instinct and conditioned reflex. Horses are profoundly social animals. In natural conditions, they live in stable, structured groups called bands or harems, typically consisting of one or several adult males, a larger number of adult females, and their offspring of various ages. The social bonds within these groups are maintained through continuous affiliative behavior, mutual grooming, proximity seeking, and synchronized activity, and are remarkably durable, persisting over years and withstanding the disruptions of seasonal migration, temporary separation, and the challenges of a competitive environment. Research using established protocols from comparative psychology has demonstrated that horses can recognize individual conspecifics from photographs, can differentiate between photographs of familiar and unfamiliar human faces, can track the emotional expressions of human faces and use this information to modulate their own behavioral responses, and can learn and retain specific symbols or objects associated with rewards over periods of many months. Perhaps most remarkably, horses appear to be capable of referential communication, using directed gaze and body orientation to direct human attention toward objects of interest, a cognitive capacity previously associated primarily with great apes and domestic dogs. The emotional life of the horse has become an increasingly rigorous subject of scientific investigation, as researchers apply the conceptual and methodological frameworks of effective neuroscience to a species whose emotional expressions were previously interpreted primarily through anthropomorphic or purely behavioral lenses. Horses display measurable physiological correlates of both positive and negative emotional states, heart rate variability, glucocorticoid levels, skin temperature asymmetry, and nasolaterality have all been proposed and partially validated as indicators of internal emotional state. Importantly, horses appear to experience something analogous to the cognitive biases that characterize emotional states in humans. Animals in a positive affective state have been shown to interpret ambiguous stimuli more optimistically, while animals subjected to chronic stress show a pessimistic bias in the same task. A finding that has profound implications for understanding the welfare of horses kept under conditions that restrict movement, social contact, and the expression of species. Typical behaviors. The concept of equine play has received particular attention. Young horses engage in elaborate, energetically costly bouts of solo and social play that appear to serve both developmental and social functions. And adult horses maintain playful behaviors throughout their lives in ways that suggest ongoing positive emotional engagement with their environment rather than purely pragmatic interactions with conspecifics and resources. The horse's memory is legendary among those who work closely with these animals, and the scientific literature increasingly supports the view that equine learning and memory systems are both more sophisticated and more nuanced than traditional training methodologies have assumed. Horses demonstrate excellent long-term retention of learned tasks. Experiments have documented the recall of specifically trained responses after intervals of years without intervening reinforcement and show rapid one-trial learning for emotionally significant events, particularly those involving fear. This latter capacity, which reflects the operation of the amygdala-dependent fear memory system common to all mammals, is of considerable practical significance. A single frightening encounter with a particular stimulus, a piece of flapping plastic, a specific sound, a particular location, can establish a fear response that persists for the animal's entire life and resists extinction through simple non-reinforced exposure. The implication for human-horse interaction is profound. Early experiences of either positive or negative emotional valence leave lasting neurological traces that shape the animal's behavioral responses to similar situations encountered years later. The concept of the critical period, a developmentally sensitive window during which particular kinds of social and environmental learning are especially impactful, has been documented in horses through studies of early handling and socialization, with animals handled positively during the first days and weeks of life showing substantially reduced fearfulness toward humans across their entire lifespan. The horse's capacity for communication within and between species is far more sophisticated than the simple behavioral vocabulary of vocalizations, ear position, and body posture that casual observation might suggest. Within the equine vocal repertoire, researchers have identified at least 6 distinct call types: the whinny or neigh, the nicker, the squeal, the snort, the blow, and the roar, each serving different communicative functions across different social contexts. The whinny, which carries over considerable distances and contains individually distinctive acoustic characteristics that allow horses to identify the caller, functions primarily in long-distance contact maintenance and reunion after separation. The nicker, a low-frequency, repetitive vocalization produced with closed lips, is used in close-range social bonding contexts, most famously by mares addressing their foals and by horses anticipating pleasurable interactions such as feeding. The squeal is predominantly associated with agonistic encounters, particularly in the context of initial contact between unfamiliar animals or sexual interactions. Beyond vocalizations, horses communicate through an elaborate system of postural and gestural signals. The positioning of ears, tail, and head, the degree of muscular tension visible in the face and neck, the direction and intensity of gaze, that experienced observers can interpret as a continuous running commentary on the animal's internal state and social intentions. The relationship between horses and time, the temporal structure of their daily lives and behavioral rhythms, illuminates the deep evolutionary pressures that shaped not merely their behavior but their physiology. Wild and feral horses living under natural conditions organize their activity around a daily rhythm dominated by grazing, typically alternating between periods of active feeding and periods of locomotion as they move across their home range in search of optimal pasture. Resting, including both drowsing in a standing position, made possible by the unique passive stay apparatus that locks the limbs in extension without muscular effort, and lying down for the brief periods of genuine REM sleep that the horse requires, is interspersed with feeding and movement in a pattern that keeps the animal active and at least partially alert for the great majority of the 24-hour cycle. This temporal structure has critical implications for the welfare of stabled horses, who are typically denied the movement, social contact, and continuous low-level foraging activity that their behavioral biology demands. Stereotypic behaviors, cribbing, weaving, stall walking, and wood chewing, are now widely understood as behavioral indicators of chronic welfare compromise, manifestations of frustrated behavioral needs rather than learned bad habits or individual neurological quirks, and their prevalence in intensively managed horse populations constitutes one of the most significant ethical challenges facing the modern equestrian industry. The horse's remarkable staying apparatus, the complex arrangement of muscles, tendons, and ligaments that allows it to lock its legs in a supporting position and rest or sleep while standing, is among the most elegantly functional anatomical adaptations in the mammalian world. In the forelimb, the stay apparatus consists principally of the extensor muscles and their tendons arranged such that when the limb bears weight, the joint angles are stabilized passively without continuous muscular contraction. In the hind limb, the apparatus is even more sophisticated, centered on the reciprocal apparatus, a system in which the stifle and hock joints are mechanically linked so that they must flex and extend in concert, and in which the patella can be locked over the medial trochlear ridge of the femur by the action of the medial patellar ligament, effectively converting the hind limb into a rigid prop. To engage this passive locking mechanism, the horse shifts its weight subtly to one side, dropping a hip and allowing the opposite hind limb to relax with the toe lightly touching the ground. The animal can then alternate between locked and unlocked hind limbs throughout a resting period, allowing deep muscle recovery while maintaining the structural integrity necessary for instant mobilization in response to a threat. This capacity evolved in response to the profound disadvantage that prone sleeping would represent for a large prey animal in open country. The time required to rise from a prone position would be prohibitively dangerous in an environment containing cursorial predators. Equine reproduction is governed by a hormonal cascade of considerable subtlety, coordinated through the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis in ways that ensure reproduction is timed to maximize foal survival in the challenging conditions of the wild. Mares are seasonally polyestrous, cycling repeatedly through estrus during the lengthening days of spring and summer, and entering a period of reproductive quiescence during the shorter days of winter, mediated by the light-sensitive production of melatonin from the pineal gland. As day length increases in late winter and early spring, declining melatonin levels release the suppression of gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, initiating a cascade of follicular development in the ovaries that culminates in the first ovulation of the breeding season. The estrus cycle of the mare averages approximately 21 days, with a period of sexual receptivity, estrus proper, lasting 4 to 7 days around the time of ovulation. The gestation period of the domestic horse is approximately 340 days, placing foaling in the spring and early summer of the following year, timing that maximizes the availability of nutritious new grass growth during the critical period of lactation. Foals are precocial, born in a highly developed state, capable of standing and nursing within the first 2 hours of life and of following the dam at full gallop within the first day, a developmental strategy reflecting the absolute necessity of mobility for survival in an open, predator-inhabited environment. The bond between mare and foal is one of the most intensely studied and biologically profound relationships in equine behavioral science, a relationship whose formation, maintenance, and eventual dissolution illuminate fundamental principles of mammalian attachment, learning, and social development. Immediately after birth, the mare engages in intensive olfactory and tactile investigation of the foal, imprinting on its individual odor signature in a sensitive period lasting only a few hours. This olfactory imprinting is remarkably specific. Experimentally substituting an alien foal during this window can result in adoption, while the same substitution hours later is typically rejected. The foal simultaneously undergoes its own attachment process, following any large moving object in its visual field during an early sensitive period, a filial imprinting process analogous to that described by Konrad Lorenz in precocial birds. Under natural conditions, the largest moving object in the foal's visual environment is virtually always its own dam, ensuring that the imprinting process directs attachment appropriately. The mare-foal bond serves not merely as an emotional foundation for the foal's social development but as its primary educational relationship. Foals learn which plants to eat and which to avoid, how to respond to social signals from other herd members, and how to navigate the social hierarchy of the band by direct observation of and interaction with the dam across the first months of life. The stallion's role within equine social organization is considerably more nuanced than the popular stereotype of the dominant, aggressive herd lord suggests. In genuinely wild equid populations, stallions typically maintain access to a band of mares through a combination of herding behavior, actively moving mares away from rival males or potential threats, and the demonstration of dominance through ritualized displays and occasional actual combat with rival males. However, the quality of the stallion's relationship with individual mares is far from purely coercive. Mares exercise considerable agency in their movements and associations, and long-term band cohesion appears to depend substantially on the affiliative relationships among the mares themselves rather than on the stallion's controlling influence. Bachelor groups of young males without reproductive access to mares maintain their own separate social hierarchies and engage in extensive rough play and sparring that develops the physical and social skills necessary for eventual reproductive competition. Older, displaced stallions may live alone or in small bachelor associations. The aggressive displays of competing stallions, parallel walking, mutual sniffing, snaking, and the dramatic striking, biting, and kicking of actual combat, are accompanied by dramatic physiological changes including elevated testosterone and cortisol, dilated pupils, and the piloerection of the crest mane, transforming these interactions into theatrical performances as much as physical contests. The coat color genetics of the domestic horse is a subject of remarkable scientific richness, reflecting centuries of human selective breeding layered upon a complex foundation of ancestral pigmentation genetics. The fundamental basis of equine coat color is the distribution and proportion of two types of melanin, eumelanin, which produces black and brown pigmentation, and pheomelanin, which produces red and yellow pigmentation. The relative dominance of these two pigment types is controlled primarily by two major gene loci, the extension locus, which determines whether any eumelanin is produced, and the agouti locus, which modifies the distribution of eumelanin when it is present. From these two fundamental axes, the three base coat colors of chestnut, bay, and black emerge, with chestnut representing the absence of functional eumelanin production, bay representing restricted eumelanin to the points of mane, tail, and lower legs, and black representing unrestricted eumelanin distribution. Upon this foundation, a profusion of additional genetic modifiers, dilution genes such as cream, dun, silver, and pearl, pattern genes governing white markings, and the complex genetics of rowaning and graying produce the extraordinary variety of equine coat colors that have fascinated breeders, artists, and scientists alike. The gray gene is particularly remarkable. Horses carrying a single copy undergo a progressive loss of pigmented hairs with age, typically becoming white by early adulthood despite having been born with a colored coat, a process driven by the depletion of the melanocyte stem cell population. The thoroughbred, perhaps the most intensively studied and selectively engineered equine population in history, represents one of the most extraordinary experiments in artificial selection ever conducted. A 3-century project of genomic refinement whose outcomes reshaped the global horse industry and established the modern sport of horse racing as an institution of enormous cultural and economic significance. The breed traces its descent from 3 foundation sires of Arabian, Turkoman, or Barb ancestry: the Byerly Turk, the Darley Arabian, and the Godolphin Arabian, imported to England in the late 17th and early 18th centuries and crossed with native English running mares. From this relatively narrow genetic foundation, a population of approximately 500,000 registered animals has been bred with complete isolation from outside genetic contributions since the establishment of the General Stud Book in 1791. The consequence of this sustained closed breeding program has been the gradual erosion of genetic diversity and the accumulation of recessive deleterious variants. The thoroughbred population today shows measurable inbreeding depression, elevated rates of orthopedic injury, exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, and a significant reduction in genetic variation compared to breeds with more diverse ancestry. Yet the thoroughbred's optimization for high-speed performance over middle distances remains unmatched by any other equine population. The fastest individuals can sustain speeds approaching 70 km per hour for the full distance of a mile, a feat that reflects the cumulative selection pressure of thousands of generations of targeted breeding. The Arabian horse occupies a position of singular distinction in the history of equine breeding, a breed of such ancient purity, physical beauty, and psychological distinctiveness that it has exerted genetic influence on virtually every other refined horse breed in the world, functioning as the foundational sire line for improvements in speed, refinement, and endurance capacity from England to Japan to the Americas. The Arabians' origins are intertwined with the culture of the Bedouin peoples of the Arabian Peninsula, who for at least 1,500 years maintained breeding records of extraordinary precision, an oral tradition of genealogy known as asl that tracked the lineage of prized mares across dozens of generations. The breed's physical characteristics, the distinctive dished profile of the face, the prominent forehead housing an enlarged brain case, the high tail carriage, the large nostrils, the arched neck, and the characteristic ground-covering stride, are not merely aesthetic preferences of human breeders but functional correlates of the extreme desert environment in which the breed was refined. The dished face and large nasal passages facilitate heat exchange in hot, dry air. The high tail carriage reflects the breed's typical elevated emotional arousal and alertness. The skin beneath the coat is darkly pigmented, protecting against ultraviolet radiation, and is so thin as to be nearly translucent, allowing superficial blood vessels, and the heat they carry, to be visible to the naked eye in a well-conditioned individual. The Andalusian horse, known more formally as the pure Spanish horse or pura raza española, carries within its morphology and behavior the accumulated heritage of 2,000 years of Iberian horse culture, a tradition in which the horse was simultaneously a tool of war, an object of aesthetic admiration, and a participant in elaborate ceremonial arts whose sophistication rivaled the finest productions of European choreography and theater. Descended from horses brought to the Iberian Peninsula by Carthaginian, Roman, and later Moorish civilizations, and subsequently refined during the medieval period by the monasteries of Andalusia, particularly the Carthusian monks of Jerez de la Frontera, who maintained rigorous breeding records during periods of political upheaval that threatened the breed's purity. The Andalusian represents the prototype from which many subsequent European warmblood breeds derive essential characteristics. The breed's extraordinary collection of natural gaits, its sensitivity to subtle postural communication from the rider, and its capacity for the elevated, rounded movements of classical dressage made it the preferred mount of European royalty and military commanders for centuries. The founding of the Spanish riding school in Vienna in 1572, an institution that continues its traditions today, was premised explicitly on the use of Andalusian stallions as the medium through which the highest expressions of equestrian art would be developed and preserved. Classical dressage, the systematic development of the horse's natural movement capacities through progressive gymnastic training, represents one of the most intellectually sophisticated and historically rich traditions of human-animal interaction in recorded history. Its roots extend to the writings of Xenophon, the Greek soldier and philosopher who authored On Horsemanship approximately 360 BC, a text of remarkable modernity in its insistence on reward-based training principles, the importance of the horse's psychological state, and the connection between the horse's trust in its rider and the quality of its movement. Following Xenophon, the tradition was elaborated through the Italian masters of the Renaissance, Federico Grisone, Giovanni Pietro Caracciolo, and above all Giambattista della Valle, before reaching its fullest theoretical articulation in the works of the French master François Robichon de la Guérinière, whose École de Cavalry, published in 1733, remains the foundational theoretical text of the classical tradition. La Guériniere's development of the shoulder-in, a movement in which the horse travels forward while bent around the rider's inside leg, engaging the hindquarters and suppling the entire spine, established a training principle whose biomechanical rationale has been confirmed by modern equine gait analysis, lending scientific validation to intuitions arrived at through centuries of empirical observation and refinement. The military horse, that great engine of violence, territorial expansion, and imperial ambition, shaped the political geography of the ancient and medieval worlds in ways that are difficult to overstate and perhaps impossible to fully reconstruct from the surviving historical record. The introduction of the chariot onto the battlefields of the ancient Near East during the second millennium BC transformed the pace, scale, and decisiveness of warfare, allowing trained teams of chariot horses and their crews to deliver concentrated shock and missile fire at speeds that infantry formations were powerless to counter. Egyptian, Hittite, Mesopotamian, and Mycenaean military establishments were transformed around the chariot arm, and the texts of the ancient world, from the Hittite horse training manual composed by the horseman Kikili around 1345 BC, the earliest known written text specifically dedicated to horse care and training, to the Egyptian accounts of the Battle of Kadesh, preserve a glimpse of the logistical and institutional complexity required to maintain armies of trained horses and chariots in operational readiness. The Kikili text, composed in the Hittite language but incorporating technical terminology borrowed from the Mitanni horse training tradition in Indic-related languages, prescribes a sophisticated 7-month conditioning program for chariot horses that includes interval training, dietary management, and systematic fitness assessment, principles that would not be out of place in a modern equine sports science manual. The transition from chariot warfare to cavalry, from the horse as the motive power of a wheeled fighting platform to the horse as a mount bearing an armed rider directly, represents one of the most consequential tactical innovations in military history, a development that unfolded gradually between the 2nd and 1st millennia BCE and was accelerated by the invention of effective riding technologies, particularly the saddle and eventually the stirrup. Early riders sat directly on the horse's back or on a simple cloth pad, stabilizing themselves through powerful grip of the thigh and coordination of the body, a demanding physical skill whose mastery required years of practice. The earliest archaeological evidence of true equestrian riding, as opposed to the driving of chariot horses, dates to approximately 900 BC in the representations of Assyrian cavalry on the relief sculptures of Ashurbanipal and his predecessors, though textual and skeletal evidence suggests mounted riding may have been practiced in the Pontic steppe considerably earlier. The Scythians, Sarmatians, and subsequent steppe peoples developed equestrian cultures of extraordinary sophistication, producing mobile warrior societies capable of covering vast distances and delivering devastating archery from horseback. The famous Parthian shot, in which a mounted archer turns in the saddle to fire backward while at full gallop, remains one of the most iconic images of ancient cavalry tactics and gave rise to the English phrase, parting shot. The stirrup, that deceptively simple loop of metal or leather that supports the rider's foot and provides lateral stability in the saddle, has been the subject of one of the most celebrated and controversial arguments in the historiography of technology. The historian Lynn White Jr., in his influential 1962 book Medieval Technology and Social Change, proposed that the introduction of the stirrup into Western Europe during the 8th century directly enabled the development of the heavy armored cavalry charge, the defining tactical element of medieval feudal warfare, and that feudalism itself, with its complex web of land tenure, military obligation, and social hierarchy, was an institutional response to the enormous cost of equipping and maintaining mounted shock cavalry. White's thesis has been disputed by subsequent historians who argue that the relationship between technology, military practice, and social organization is far more complex than a simple causal chain from stirrup to feudalism suggests, and that stirruped cavalry did not immediately or universally displace infantry or other military arms. Nevertheless, the stirrup's contribution to the stability and effectiveness of mounted warriors is undeniable, and its adoption by different cultures at different times appears to have had measurable consequences for the tactical options available to armies and the social structures that supported them. The Mongol conquests of the 13th century represent perhaps the most extreme demonstration in human history of what a culture fully organized around horsemanship could accomplish in terms of territorial expansion, administrative projection, and the disruption of established civilizations. At the height of their expansion under Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongol Empire encompassed approximately 24 million square kilometers, the largest contiguous land empire in history, stretching from the Korean peninsula to the Adriatic Sea, from Siberia to the Persian Gulf. This extraordinary achievement was made possible almost entirely by the Mongol horse, a compact, cold-hardy, remarkably self-sufficient animal of the Central Asian steppe that could survive winter by pawing through snow to reach the dried grasses beneath, required no grain supplementation, and could maintain operational fitness under conditions that would rapidly debilitate larger, more refined breeds requiring regular grain feeding and stable housing. Mongol warriors rode with a string of remount horses, typically 3 to 5 animals per warrior, allowing them to cover distances that seemed impossible to their enemies, who could not conceive of an army capable of sustained movement at cavalry speed for weeks at a time without logistical resupply. The psychological impact of this mobility was as devastating as the physical, appearing seemingly from nowhere at the boundaries of civilizations accustomed to slower-moving threats. The horse's transformation of agriculture across the Old World constitutes an aspect of equine history that, while less dramatic than the cavalry charge or the chariot race, may ultimately have had more profound and lasting consequences for the daily lives of human populations. Draft horses, large-bodied, heavily muscled breeds selected for pulling power rather than speed, became the dominant agricultural power source across temperate Europe and North America from the medieval period until the widespread adoption of mechanical traction in the early 20th century. The development of the horse collar, a padded yoke that transferred the tractive force of the horse's chest and shoulders rather than its throat, enabling it to pull loads without restricting the airway, during the early medieval period dramatically increased the effective pulling power available to agricultural communities and contributed to the expansion of cultivated area, the deepening of plowing, and the acceleration of agricultural productivity. The great draft breeds, the Shire, the Clydesdale, the Suffolk Punch, the Percheron, the Brabant, represent the product of centuries of selective breeding for specific combinations of size, strength, temperament, and structural soundness, optimized for the punishing repetitive demands of plowing, hauling timber, and drawing heavy wagons over unpaved roads whose depth of mud in wet seasons was limited only by the depth of the horse's patience. The Shire horse deserves particular attention as an embodiment of the extraordinary selective capacity of human breeding programs applied to a single species over a relatively brief historical period. Descended from the great warhorses of medieval England, the destriers that bore armored knights into battle, the Shire represents centuries of selection for maximum size and pulling power, producing an animal that in exceptional individuals has exceeded 1 ton in body weight and 19 hands in height, making it the largest equine breed in the world. The breed's characteristic feathering, the long, silky hair that cascades over the fetlock and hoof, is not merely an aesthetic ornament but an anatomical adaptation associated with the thick-skinned, dense-boned lower limb architecture that characterizes heavy draft breeds. Shire horses achieved their peak numbers in the late 19th century, when Britain's agricultural and industrial economy depended on horsepower for virtually every form of heavy land transport, and London alone maintained a population of some 300,000 working horses, an enormous concentration of equine labor whose waste management, welfare, and mortality constituted some of the great urban management challenges of the Victorian era. The rapid displacement of the draft horse by the internal combustion engine in the early 20th century was one of the most abrupt demographic collapses in the history of a domesticated species, with Shire numbers falling from over 1 million at their peak to fewer than 10,000 by the mid-20th century. The Pony Express, that iconic episode in the history of American communication, endures in popular imagination as a symbol of romantic frontier enterprise and individual courage. But its historical significance lies more precisely in what it reveals about the limits of even the finest horse-based communication technology and the extraordinary moment in which that technology was about to be superseded by something entirely unprecedented. Established in April 1860 by the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company, the Pony Express employed approximately 80 young riders to carry mail across approximately 3,200 kilometers of wilderness between St. Joseph, Missouri, and Sacramento, California, maintaining relay stations every 15 to 25 kilometers where fresh horses awaited exhausted riders. A single piece of mail could traverse this distance in approximately 10 days, a fraction of the time required by the overland stagecoach. The horses used were specifically selected for speed, stamina, and sure-footedness in difficult terrain, predominantly mustangs and mustang crosses, whose hardy constitution and natural athleticism made them more suitable for the rugged terrain of the Great Basin and Sierra Nevada than any refined eastern breed would have been. The service operated for only 18 months before the completion of the transcontinental telegraph made it economically obsolete, a poignant illustration of the horse's irreplaceable role in human communication on the eve of its own technological displacement. The Mustang of the American West represents one of the most remarkable rewilding events in the natural history of any domesticated species, the return of an animal that had been absent from an entire continent for 10,000 years, now running free across the landscapes that its ancestors helped shape millions of years before. Descended from horses brought to the Americas by Spanish conquistadors beginning with Hernán Cortés's expedition of 1519, the Mustang populations of the Great Plains and Great Basin established themselves through a combination of deliberate release, accidental escape from missions and ranches, and the eventual adoption of horse culture by Native American peoples who recognized the animal's transformative potential with extraordinary speed. Within little more than a century of the horse's reintroduction, cultures such as the Comanche had built entire civilizations around equestrian skills of a sophistication that rivaled any in the world, developing riding techniques, selective breeding practices, and military tactics specifically optimized for the ecological conditions of the southern plains. The Mustang itself, freed from human selection pressure and adapting once again to the demands of free-ranging life, underwent a process of domestication reversal, reducing in size, broadening in hoof, thickening in constitution, converging toward a morphology that resembles in certain respects the wild horses of the ancient steppe more than the refined riding horses from which it directly descended. The Native American relationship with the horse is a story of cultural transformation so rapid and so complete that it stands as one of the most dramatic examples of technological adoption in the anthropological record. When Spanish horses first escaped or were taken from colonial settlements in the 16th and early 17th centuries, The plains tribes had been pedestrian hunters and gatherers for thousands of years, pursuing bison on foot using communal techniques of driving and ambush that required elaborate social organization but produced limited and unpredictable yields. The acquisition of the horse, beginning in the southwest with the Pueblo peoples and Apaches and spreading northward through complex trade networks to reach the northern plains tribes by the early 18th century, within a generation transformed the subsistence economy, social organization, military capacity, and ceremonial life of dozens of distinct cultural groups. The mounted bison hunt replaced the communal pedestrian drive almost everywhere the horse became available, dramatically increasing the efficiency and productivity of food procurement. Populations that had been relatively constrained by the difficulties of following bison on foot could now cover enormous distances, maintaining proximity to the herds throughout their seasonal migrations. Warfare became faster, more mobile, and more lethal. Social hierarchies reorganized around horsemanship skill and horse wealth. The horse became simultaneously an economic asset, a social currency, a spiritual companion, and the central metaphor through which plains peoples understood power, freedom, and their relationship to the land. The Spanish conquistadors' military use of the horse against the populations of the Americas constitutes one of the most morally complex and historically significant episodes in the animal's long relationship with human violence. When Hernán Cortés landed in Mexico in 1519, he commanded 16 horses, a number so small as to seem militarily trivial, yet these animals exercised a psychological impact on Aztec observers that far exceeded their physical contribution to the Spanish fighting capacity. Aztec cosmology had no framework within which to immediately categorize the horse. The animals were initially interpreted by some observers as supernatural beings, and the sight of an armored Spaniard mounted on a galloping horse presented to peoples with no prior experience of any large domesticated animal an image of power and otherness that, combined with the thunder of firearms and the devastating effectiveness of steel armor and edged weapons against obsidian-armed infantry, created a psychological asymmetry that contributed materially to the speed of the Aztec Empire's collapse. The horse's role in the conquest of the Inca Empire by Francisco Pizarro, accomplished with an even smaller initial force, followed a similar pattern with the capture and execution of the Inca ruler Aalpa at Cajamarca in 1532, made possible partly by the speed and shock of a cavalry charge that scattered thousands of soldiers who had never experienced the terror of mounted warriors bearing down upon them. The horse in ancient Greek civilization occupied a position that transcended the merely practical, becoming a symbol of aristocratic excellence, divine favor, and the competitive values that lay at the heart of Hellenic culture. The Olympic Games, founded according to tradition in 776 BCE, included equestrian events from an early stage. The chariot race, Tethrapon, was added in 680 BCE and the horse race, Kales, in 648 BCE, and these events attracted the participation and spectatorship of the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in the Greek world, since the expense of maintaining chariot teams and trained racehorses placed equestrian competition beyond the reach of all but the elite. The mythology of Greek horse culture is richly populated with divine equines, Pegasus, the winged horse born from the blood of the Gorgon Medusa, the hippocampus, the seahorse of Poseidon, and the centaurs, those ambiguous beings of human intelligence and equine body who embodied the tension between civilization and wild nature that lay at the heart of Greek moral philosophy. The goddess Athena was credited with inventing the bridle, and Poseidon, god of the sea, earthquakes, and storms, was simultaneously the patron deity of horses, a mythological connection that may preserve a dim cultural memory of the association between horse culture and the seafaring, maritime-adjacent cultures of the early Bronze Age Aegean. Rome's relationship with the horse was characteristically pragmatic, organizational, and imperial in scale. The Roman state invested enormous institutional resources in the maintenance of horse breeding programs, veterinary infrastructure, and the logistical systems necessary to support the cavalry and draft horse requirements of an empire spanning 3 continents. The Roman cavalry, equites, gave its name to the equestrian order, the second tier of the Roman social hierarchy, preserving in political terminology the historical memory of a time when cavalry service was the defining social obligation and military function of the Roman propertied class. Roman veterinary medicine, as codified in the texts of Absurdus, Vegetius, and the Mulomedicina Chironis, was remarkably sophisticated, addressing conditions of the horse's alimentary, respiratory, musculoskeletal, and reproductive systems with diagnostic acuity and therapeutic approaches that, while embedded in a humoral theoretical framework, frequently converged on empirically effective remedies. The Roman cursus publicus, the imperial postal relay system, maintained a network of horse relay stations across the empire that represented one of the most impressive logistical achievements of the ancient world, enabling official communications to travel at speeds of up to 250 kilometers per day along the road network and ensuring that news, orders, and administrative correspondence could traverse the vast distances of the empire within days rather than the weeks or months that private travel would have required. Chinese civilization's relationship with the horse is inseparable from the history of the Silk Road, that vast, shifting network of trade routes connecting the Han Dynasty's eastern terminus at Chang'an to the Mediterranean shores of the Roman world, across 2,000 years and thousands of kilometers of desert, steppe, and mountain terrain. The Han Emperor Wu, who came to power in 141 BCE and whose reign inaugurated China's most aggressive phase of territorial and commercial expansion, was famously obsessed with acquiring the Tianma, the heavenly horses of the Fergana Valley in Central Asia, whose blood-sweating, long-limbed, deep-chested physiques represented an entirely different equine type from the compact steppe ponies available in China's own territories. The Han's military campaigns against the Xiongnu nomads of the northern steppe, which defined the geopolitical challenge of the dynasty's first 2 centuries, were hampered by the inferiority of Chinese cavalry mounts compared to the horses of their steppe adversaries. The diplomatic and military missions dispatched to the Fergana to obtain heavenly horses, and the military campaigns that backed these diplomatic efforts when negotiation failed, represent one of the earliest documented examples of a state investing military resources specifically in the acquisition of superior genetic material for its horse breeding program, establishing a precedent that would be repeated by every subsequent empire that recognized equine quality as a strategic resource. The Islamic civilization's contribution to equine culture encompasses medicine, breeding science, poetry, and military technology in a synthesis that profoundly influenced the development of horse culture across the entire medieval world. The Prophet Muhammad's injunctions regarding the care and respect owed to horses are preserved in numerous hadith traditions, establishing the horse's spiritual significance within Islamic cosmological thinking and providing theological grounding for the extraordinary cultural investment that Arab, Persian, and subsequent Islamicate civilizations made in equine excellence. The Arabic tradition of horse breeding, centered on the 5 classical strains or Kamsa of the Arabian horse, supposedly descending from mares selected by the Prophet himself for their purity and quality, combined with sophisticated Islamic veterinary medicine, produced a tradition of horse husbandry whose sophistication was unmatched in the medieval world. Treatises on horse care, selection, training, and disease treatment were produced in Arabic, Persian, and Turkish across the medieval centuries, drawing on the accumulated observations of nomadic pastoral cultures across vast geographic ranges and synthesizing this empirical knowledge with the theoretical frameworks inherited from Greek medical tradition through the translation movements of the early Abbasid Caliphate. This tradition of equine knowledge was transmitted to medieval Europe partly through the medium of Andalusian Islamic culture, contributing to the gradual improvement of European horse breeding during the High Middle Ages. The horse in medieval Japanese culture developed along trajectories quite distinct from the traditions of the Islamic world or Christian Europe, embedded in the distinctive social organization of the samurai class and the evolving tactical requirements of Japanese warfare. The indigenous Japanese horse, a small, robust animal of probable Korean and Chinese mainland origin, was supplemented from the 8th century onward by imports from Korea and continental Asia, but remained considerably smaller than the chargers of medieval European knights, rarely exceeding 14 hands in height. This relative smallness was not necessarily a disadvantage within the Japanese tactical context, where the heavy cavalry charges of European knighthood were replaced by individual mounted archery, The Yabusame tradition in which riders at full gallop discharged arrows at targets with accuracy as the defining expression of mounted warrior skill. The horse in samurai culture carried an enormous weight of symbolic significance. Specific horses were named, celebrated in literature, and mourned at death. The Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, Japan's oldest chronicles, contain numerous episodes in which horses figure as divine gifts, omens, and vehicles of supernatural significance. The breeding of the Kiso horse, a mountain-adapted breed from Nagano Prefecture, represents one of Japan's oldest documented equine breeding traditions, with records extending back more than 1,000 years. A breed now critically endangered whose preservation has become a matter of national cultural heritage significance. The horse in art represents one of the most enduring, widely distributed, and emotionally powerful themes in the visual record of human civilization. A presence that spans from the painted caves of the Paleolithic to the canvases of Jericho and the photographs of Edward Muybridge, and that in each of its manifestations reveals something essential about the values, fears, aesthetic sensibilities, and technological capacities of the culture that produced it. The cave paintings of Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, and dozens of other sites scattered across Franco-Cantabrian Europe contain horse images of breathtaking observational accuracy, animals rendered with attention to the subtle variations of coat color, the characteristic postures of alert attention and relaxed grazing, the social groupings of small bands that represent the oldest confirmed evidence of human artistic engagement with the equine form, dating in the case of the Chauvet paintings to approximately 36,000 years before present. These images were produced by artists who must have spent countless hours in close observation of living horses. The accuracy of coat marking patterns, the rendering of muscular anatomy, and the capture of behavioral states leave no doubt that the painters knew their subjects with the intimacy of long acquaintance, whether as hunters whose survival depended on understanding equine behavior or as individuals drawn to horses by something more complex and elusive than purely pragmatic interest. Edward Muybridge's photographic investigation of animal locomotion, conducted at the University of Pennsylvania and at Leland Stanford's Palo Alto stock farm between 1872 and 1887, constitutes one of the most scientifically consequential acts in the history of both photographic art and equine science, a project whose results simultaneously resolved a celebrated empirical controversy, founded the scientific study of animal biomechanics, and contributed foundational motion studies to the emerging art of cinematography. The original commission from Leland Stanford, himself a horse enthusiast and California governor, was to resolve definitively the question of whether a trotting horse ever had all 4 feet simultaneously off the ground, a question that had been debated inconclusively for years and on which Stanford had wagered a considerable sum. Muybridge's photographs of the mare Sally Gardner at the Palo Alto track in 1878, captured using a series of cameras triggered by tripwires as the horse galloped past, proved definitively that at the moment of suspension in the gallop all 4 feet are simultaneously airborne, but contrary to what many people had supposed, the moment of suspension occurs when the limbs are gathered beneath the body, not when they are at maximum extension. The psychological impact on artists was immediate and profound. Painters who had for generations depicted galloping horses with front and back legs simultaneously extended, an appealing but anatomically impossible posture never actually observed during actual galloping, were confronted with the need to reconsider their conventions of movement representation. The literature of the horse, spanning from the earliest Sanskrit texts that celebrate the Ashvamedha or horse sacrifice as the supreme royal ritual, through Homer's epithets for the horse-taming Trojans, to the novels of Henry Williamson and the poetry of Ted Hughes, constitutes a literary tradition of remarkable range and depth, in which the horse serves variously as a symbol of freedom, of power, of nobility, of wildness barely contained, and of the bittersweet relationship between human civilization and the natural world it has simultaneously depended upon and diminished. Anna Sewell's Black Beauty, published in 1877 and narrated in the first person by an autobiographical horse, is often credited with directly influencing the animal welfare reform movements of the late Victorian period. Its vivid depictions of the suffering inflicted by check reins, bearing reins, and overwork provoked genuine public sentiment and contributed to the legislative attention that eventually produced improved standards of working animal welfare in Britain and beyond. D.H. Lawrence's poem, The Horse Dealer's Daughter, and his novel Saint Mar explore the horse as an embodiment of pre-rational, instinctual life force, a symbol of everything that post-industrial civilization had suppressed or domesticated in the human psyche. These literary uses of the horse as metaphor are not decorative. They reflect a genuine and deep ambivalence in human culture about what the domestication of the horse has meant, both for the horse and for ourselves. The horse in medieval Japanese culture developed along trajectories quite distinct from the traditions of the Islamic world or Christian Europe, embedded in the distinctive social organization of the samurai class and the evolving tactical requirements of Japanese warfare. The indigenous Japanese horse, a small, robust animal of probable Korean and Chinese mainland origin, was supplemented from the 8th century onward by imports from Korea and continental Asia, but remained considerably smaller than the chargers of medieval European knights, rarely exceeding 14 hands in height. This relative smallness was not necessarily a disadvantage within the Japanese tactical context, where the heavy cavalry charges of European knighthood were replaced by individual mounted archery, the Yabusame tradition in which riders at full gallop discharged arrows at targets with accuracy, as the defining expression of mounted warrior skill. The horse in samurai culture carried an enormous weight of symbolic significance. Specific horses were named, celebrated in literature, and mourned at death. The Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, Japan's oldest chronicles, contain numerous episodes in which horses figure as divine gifts, omens, and vehicles of supernatural significance. The breeding of the Kiso horse, a mountain-adapted breed from Nagano Prefecture, represents one of Japan's oldest documented equine breeding traditions, with records extending back more than 1,000 years, a breed now critically endangered whose preservation has become a matter of national cultural heritage significance. The horse in art represents one of the most enduring, widely distributed, and emotionally powerful themes in the visual record of human civilization, a presence that spans from the painted caves of the Paleolithic to the canvases of Jericho and the photographs of Edward Muybridge, and that in each of its manifestations reveals something essential about the values, fears, aesthetic sensibilities, and technological capacities of the culture that produced it. The cave paintings of Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, and dozens of other sites scattered across Franco-Cantabrian Europe contain horse images of breathtaking observational accuracy, animals rendered with attention to the subtle variations of coat color, the characteristic postures of alert attention and relaxed grazing, the social groupings of small bands that represent the oldest confirmed evidence of human artistic engagement with the equine form, dating in the case of the Chauvet paintings to approximately 36,000 years before present. These images were produced by artists who must have spent countless hours in close observation of living horses. The accuracy of coat marking patterns, the rendering of muscular anatomy, and the capture of behavioral states leave no doubt that the painters knew their subjects with the intimacy of long acquaintance, whether as hunters whose survival depended on understanding equine behavior or as individuals drawn to horses by something more complex and elusive than purely pragmatic interest. Edward Muybridge's photographic investigation of animal locomotion, conducted at the University of Pennsylvania and at Leland Stanford's Palo Alto stock farm between 1872 and 1887, constitutes one of the most scientifically consequential acts in the history of both photographic art and equine science, a project whose results simultaneously resolved a celebrated empirical controversy, founded the scientific study of animal biomechanics, and contributed foundational motion studies to the emerging art of cinematography. The original commission from Leland Stanford, himself a horse enthusiast and California governor, was to resolve definitively the question of whether a trotting horse ever had all 4 feet simultaneously off the ground, a question that had been debated inconclusively for years and on which Stanford had wagered a considerable sum. Muybridge's photographs of the mare Sally Gardner at the Palo Alto track in 1878, captured using a series of cameras triggered by tripwires as the horse galloped past, proved definitively that at the moment of suspension in the gallop all 4 feet are simultaneously airborne, but contrary to what many people had supposed, The moment of suspension occurs when the limbs are gathered beneath the body, not when they are at maximum extension. The psychological impact on artists was immediate and profound. Painters who had for generations depicted galloping horses with front and back legs simultaneously extended, an appealing but anatomically impossible posture never actually observed during actual galloping, were confronted with the need to reconsider their conventions of movement representation. The literature of the horse, spanning from the earliest Sanskrit texts that celebrate the Ashvamedha or horse sacrifice as the supreme royal ritual, through Homer's epithets for the horse-taming Trojans, to the novels of Henry Williamson and the poetry of Ted Hughes, constitutes a literary tradition of remarkable range and depth, in which the horse serves variously as a symbol of freedom, of power, of nobility, of wildness barely contained, and of the bittersweet relationship between human civilization and the natural world it has simultaneously depended upon and diminished. Anna Sewell's Black Beauty, published in 1877 and narrated in the first person by an autobiographical horse, is often credited with directly influencing the animal welfare reform movements of the late Victorian period. Its vivid depictions of the suffering inflicted by check reins, bearing reins, and overwork provoked genuine public sentiment and contributed to the legislative attention that eventually produced improved standards of working animal welfare in Britain and beyond. D.H. Lawrence's poem, The Horse Dealer's Daughter, and his novel Saint Mar explore the horse as an embodiment of pre-rational, instinctual life force, a symbol of everything that post-industrial civilization had suppressed or domesticated in the human psyche. These literary uses of the horse as metaphor are not decorative. They reflect a genuine and deep ambivalence in human culture about what the domestication of the horse has meant, both for the horse and for ourselves. The Icelandic horse occupies a unique position in the global equine landscape as a breed of extraordinary genetic isolation and cultural significance, maintained on the island of Iceland in a condition of genetic purity that has been enforced by legislation prohibiting the importation of any horse to the island since the 10th century CE. The founding population, brought to Iceland by Norse settlers during the Viking colonization period between 874 and 930 CE, has been breeding in isolation for over 1,000 years without the genetic input of any outside population, a duration of isolation long enough to allow the development of distinctive physical and behavioral characteristics not found in any other breed. Most famously, the Icelandic horse possesses 2 additional gaits beyond the walk, trot, and canter common to most breeds. The tolt, a smooth, 4-beat lateral gait that can be performed across a speed range from slow walking pace to near canter velocity and provides an exceptionally smooth ride due to the absence of a moment of suspension, and the skay or flying pace, a 2-beat lateral gait of great speed performed with both legs on the same side moving in unison, used in racing contexts, and capable of speeds approaching 50 km per hour. These additional gaits are controlled by a specific variant in the DMRT3 gene, a transcription factor that regulates the development of spinal interneurons involved in limb coordination, a genetic variant that appears in multiple other gaited horse breeds worldwide, suggesting that similar selective pressures for smooth-gaited riding animals have repeatedly produced analogous solutions through selection at the same genetic locus. The science of equine genetics has advanced at extraordinary speed in the genomic era, transforming our understanding of breed history, disease mechanisms, population structure, and the genetic architecture of economically important traits with a thoroughness and resolution that would have been impossible using the molecular tools available even 20 years ago. The sequencing of the domestic horse genome, completed in 2007 using DNA from a thoroughbred mare named Twilight, established the reference genome against which subsequent equine genetic research has been conducted, providing a foundational resource of approximately 2.7 billion base pairs distributed across 32 pairs of autosomes and a pair of sex chromosomes. Subsequent population genomic studies, analyzing the genomes of hundreds to thousands of horses from diverse breeds and geographic origins, have revealed the complex mosaic of selective sweeps, founder effects, and artificial selection that has shaped the genetic architecture of domestic horse breeds over the past 5,000 years. Genome-wide association studies have identified genetic variants associated with susceptibility to musculoskeletal disorders, recurrent exertional rhabdomyolysis, equine metabolic syndrome, and various forms of inflammatory disease, findings with direct implications for breeding programs aimed at reducing the burden of heritable disease. Perhaps most consequentially, ancient DNA analysis of archaeological horse remains has allowed researchers to directly observe the genetic changes that accompanied domestication, identifying specific variants in genes associated with docility, pain sensitivity, and spinal biomechanics that were brought to high frequency through early selective breeding, providing a molecular portrait of the domestication process itself. The science of equine behavior and welfare has undergone a conceptual revolution over the past 3 decades, moving from a framework in which horses were understood primarily as stimulus-response learning machines to a more sophisticated model that recognizes their rich emotional lives, cognitive complexity, social sophistication, and specific behavioral needs that must be met if the animals are to experience genuine well-being. This revolution has been driven by a convergence of methodological advances, the application of established protocols from cognitive ethology and effective neuroscience to equine subjects, and a growing recognition within veterinary and equestrian communities that stereotypic behaviors, fear responses, and various forms of behavioral pathology that had previously been attributed to individual personality quirks or breed characteristics are in fact predictable consequences of management, conditions that frustrate fundamental behavioral needs. The 5 Freedoms Framework, developed originally for farm animals by the UK's Farm Animal Welfare Council in 1979, has been applied to horses with the recognition that equine welfare requires not merely the absence of physical suffering but positive opportunities for social interaction, movement, foraging, and the expression of other species-typical behaviors. The concept of the positive welfare of horses, states of genuine pleasure, engagement, and positive effect rather than merely the absence of pain and fear, has entered mainstream equine veterinary discourse and is beginning to influence the design of housing systems, training methodologies, and management practices in progressive equestrian facilities around the world. The therapeutic use of horses, encompassing a spectrum of practices from hippotherapy, in which the movement of the horse is used as a therapeutic medium by licensed healthcare professionals, to equine-assisted psychotherapy, to the broader category of equine-facilitated wellness activities, represents one of the most rapidly expanding areas of human-horse interaction in contemporary society, drawing on both empirical research into the physiological and psychological effects of horse contact, and a deep cultural intuition about the unique capacity of horses to engage human attention, emotion, and embodied awareness in therapeutically beneficial ways. The neurophysiological rationale for hippotherapy, the use of equine movement to stimulate neuromotor development in children with cerebral palsy, autism spectrum disorder, or other movement disorders, rests on the observation that the 3-dimensional movement of the horse's back during walking closely mimics the movement of the human pelvis during bipedal walking, providing rhythmic sensory stimulation to the postural musculature and vestibular system that can improve trunk control, balance, and muscle tone. Clinical studies have documented improvements in gait, balance, social communication, and quality of life in various clinical populations receiving hippotherapy, though the research base remains somewhat heterogeneous in methodology and the mechanisms of observed benefits are still being clarified. Beyond the clinical applications, the concept of equine wisdom, the horse's capacity to provide biofeedback about human emotional states through its attentive, sensitive responses to subtle changes in body tension and emotional arousal, has become central to various equine-assisted personal development modalities that operate outside the clinical healthcare framework. The horse's role in contemporary competitive sport encompasses a dizzying diversity of disciplines, from the explosive athleticism of show jumping and the gymnastic precision of Olympic dressage to the stamina demands of 3-day eventing, the speed and contact of polo, the medieval grandeur of mounted games, and the culturally specific traditions of rodeo, vaquero horsemanship, and Central Asian buzkashi, that collectively represent the most widespread and economically significant contemporary relationship between humans and horses. The Olympic equestrian sports, dressage, show jumping, and eventing, together constitute one of the only arenas in the Olympic program in which men and women compete against each other on equal terms, and in which the athletic merit of a non-human participant is as central to competitive success as that of the human athlete. This unique status, the horse as genuine athletic partner rather than mere equipment, raises complex questions about the ethics of competitive equestrian sport, questions about consent, about the welfare implications of the physical demands placed on equine athletes, about the selection pressures imposed by competitive breeding programs, and about the appropriate standard of care owed to animals whose participation in competition they cannot choose or refuse. These questions are being addressed with increasing seriousness by sport governing bodies, veterinary organizations, and the equestrian community itself, producing a gradual evolution of rules, inspection protocols, and welfare standards that reflect a deepening appreciation of the horse's experiential reality. The economics of the modern horse industry globally represents a financial ecosystem of remarkable scale and complexity, encompassing breeding, training, veterinary services, feed and equipment manufacture, competition organization, betting markets, and the vast secondary industries of tourism, publishing, and entertainment that orbit the primary equestrian economy. In the United States alone, the American Horse Council's most recent comprehensive economic analysis estimated the horse industry's contribution to GDP at approximately $50 billion annually, supporting more than 460,000 full-time jobs and involving some 7.2 million Americans in ownership, care, competition, or recreation connected with horses. The global thoroughbred racing industry, encompassing breeding, training, racing, and the betting markets that finance the entire enterprise, generates estimated annual revenues exceeding $115 billion across the major racing nations of the United Kingdom, Ireland, France, Japan, Hong Kong, Australia, and the United States, with the Middle Eastern nations of the UAE and Saudi Arabia investing increasing sovereign wealth in the development of world-class racing facilities and the acquisition of elite bloodstock. The growth of equestrian sport in previously non-traditional markets, China, Brazil, and Southeast Asia, reflects both the expanding global middle class and the association of equestrian activity with aspirational lifestyle values that transcend the sport's traditional aristocratic cultural roots, suggesting that the economic footprint of the global horse industry will continue to expand even as the horse's agricultural role diminishes further in most parts of the world. The phenomenon of the feral horse, populations descended from domestic animals that have established self-sustaining free-ranging populations, raises profound and sometimes contentious questions about ecology, native species status, conservation philosophy, and the ethical obligations humans bear toward animals whose ancestors were domesticated by human action. Beyond the American mustang, significant feral populations exist on the barrier islands of the American Atlantic coast, the Assateague and Chincoteague ponies of Maryland and Virginia, the Corolla horses of North Carolina's Outer Banks, as well as in Australia, where feral horses known as brumbies inhabit large areas of the alpine regions of New South Wales and Victoria. In New Zealand, the Kaimanawa horses of the Kaimanawa Ranges have been the subject of sustained debate about population management, with conservationists arguing that the horses damage native vegetation and compete with endemic wildlife, while horse welfare advocates and a substantial segment of the New Zealand public maintain emotional and cultural attachment to the animals. These debates are not merely technical questions of wildlife management. They touch on deep disagreements about what native means in an ecological context, about whether the horse's pre-Columbian extinction in the Americas should be considered ecologically relevant to the management of modern feral populations, and about the degree to which the transformative power of domestication places special ethical obligations on human societies toward the animals it created and subsequently released or abandoned. The horse's relationship to climate throughout its evolutionary history has been one of mutual causation. Climate shaped the horse, and the horse in turn shaped the ecosystems within which it lived. The great grazing pressure exerted by horse populations, historically operating across millions of square kilometers of grassland, was a significant ecological force, influencing the structure and composition of grass communities, the erosion and deposition of soils, the hydrology of grassland watersheds, and the distribution of nutrients across the landscape through the massive quantities of dung produced by herds of large herbivores. Some ecologists and conservation biologists have proposed that the reintroduction of large herbivores, including horses and other megafauna, to degraded or simplified grassland ecosystems could restore ecological processes lost with the Pleistocene extinctions, recovering some of the dynamic heterogeneity that characterized pre-human grassland environments and potentially contributing to carbon sequestration through the stimulation of deep-rooted grass growth. Projects such as Pleistocene Park in the Siberian permafrost region, where the rewilding biologist Sergei Zimov has been restoring large herbivore grazing to Arctic grassland with the explicit goal of cooling permafrost through the physical effects of herd animal activity on snow compaction and soil thermal dynamics, have brought the theoretical frameworks of Pleistocene rewilding into contact with the urgent empirical realities of contemporary climate change, positioning the horse, once again, at the intersection of human ambition and the transformation of landscape. The contemporary conservation status of wild and semi-wild horse populations represents a microcosm of the broader challenges facing large mammal conservation in a world of shrinking habitat, growing human populations, and increasingly contested relationships between wildlife and pastoral land use. Przewalski's horse, as previously noted, has been successfully reintroduced to portions of its historic range in Mongolia and China, and the global captive population, maintained in zoos worldwide under the coordination of an international studbook, has grown to approximately 2,000 individuals, providing a genetic reservoir that continues to support the reintroduction program. The reintroduction effort has not been without difficulty. Horses introduced to the steppe face predation from wolves, competition with domestic livestock for grazing resources, and the logistical challenges of establishing viable social groups in a landscape that has been transformed by decades of intensive human land use. Climate change introduces an additional layer of uncertainty, as the temperature and precipitation regimes of Central Asian steppe environments are projected to shift substantially over the coming decades in ways that will influence the productivity and spatial distribution of the grass communities on which the reintroduced horses depend. Nevertheless, the Przewalski's horse reintroduction stands as one of the most symbolically powerful and practically instructive achievements of modern conservation biology, demonstrating that even a species that has been absent from the wild for half a century can be successfully returned to functional participation in its native ecosystem through sustained institutional commitment and careful scientific management. The profound human psychological response to horses, the deep, apparently cross-cultural affective resonance that horses evoke in human observers, even those with little direct experience of the animals, has been the subject of speculation and investigation by psychologists, anthropologists, and evolutionary biologists seeking to understand the roots of what sometimes amounts to a passionate, almost compulsive human attachment to the equine form. Various theoretical frameworks have been proposed. The biophilia hypothesis, developed by E.O. Wilson, suggests that human beings have an evolved predisposition toward positive emotional engagement with other living organisms, particularly those with whom our ancestors shared long periods of ecological coevolution. The specific case of the horse-human relationship might reflect an additional layer of coevolutionary entanglement, 5,000 years of domestication during which both species have undergone selective pressure that reinforced their capacity for mutual communication and emotional attunement. Research has documented that horse-human interaction produces measurable physiological responses in both participants, reductions in cortisol and heart rate, increases in oxytocin, that parallel the physiological signatures of positive social bonding between humans, suggesting that the emotional bond reported by horse owners and riders is not merely a projection of sentiment onto an indifferent animal but a genuine bidirectional affective relationship with physiological correlates in both species. The specific neural mechanisms through which horses read and respond to human emotional states have become the focus of a growing body of experimental research that reveals capacities for cross-species emotional perception that are considerably more sophisticated than the simple fear response to human tension that older training literature emphasized. Research published in the journal Current Biology demonstrated that horses presented with photographs of angry and happy human faces showed differential autonomic responses, increased left eye gaze, indicating right hemisphere processing of negative stimuli, to the angry expressions, and that horses could subsequently recognize the person whose photograph they had seen, responding with heightened wariness to individuals they had previously seen expressing anger even when those individuals were physically present and not expressing any particular emotion. This capacity for cross-modal recognition, using information acquired in one sensory context to inform responses in a different sensory context, represents a level of social cognitive sophistication that had previously been documented only in chimpanzees and dogs among non-human animals. The finding has obvious practical implications for human-horse interaction, suggesting that the emotional history of individual encounters accumulates in the horse's memory and shapes subsequent interactions in ways that experienced horse handlers have long intuited, but science is only beginning to document with experimental precision. The horse, it appears, does not merely react to the human in front of it. It remembers the human it has previously encountered and adjusts its expectations accordingly. The biomechanics of the equine gallop represent one of the most intensively studied and technically fascinating areas of vertebrate locomotor science. A complex, dynamically unstable, yet astonishingly mechanically efficient movement pattern that has been analyzed using high-speed cinematography, force plate measurement, accelerometer telemetry, and computational fluid dynamics modeling in an effort to understand both its extraordinary performance characteristics and the reasons for its frequent failure through catastrophic orthopedic injury. The gallop is an asymmetric gait in which the horse's body describes a complex three-dimensional trajectory, undulating vertically, rolling laterally, and yawing slightly about the vertical axis, while the four limbs execute a complex coordinated sequence in which each foot contacts the ground independently at slightly different times, creating a four-beat footfall pattern with a moment of complete suspension between each complete stride cycle. The leading leg, the limb that makes the final contact before the moment of suspension, determines the direction of the gallop. Horses change lead when turning to redistribute the asymmetric loading and optimize the geometry of the turning arc. Force plate studies have measured ground reaction forces during galloping that exceed 3 times body weight on individual limbs, a loading that is transmitted through the delicate structures of the lower limb, tendons, sesamoid bones, and articular cartilage, with each stride, explaining the vulnerability of racing horses to catastrophic tendon failure and condylar fracture. The role of the horse in shaping the history of transport infrastructure, roads, bridges, ferries, canals, and eventually railways, is a dimension of equine historical influence that tends to be underappreciated relative to the more dramatic narratives of military conquest and pastoral migration. Roman roads, whose engineered durability has allowed segments to survive for 2 millennia, were dimensioned, surfaced, and organized with the specific requirements of horse-drawn vehicle traffic in mind. The standard Roman road width accommodated 2 vehicles passing abreast, and the characteristic cambered surface with lateral drainage channels addressed the problem of equine traction on wet surfaces. The canal systems built across Britain, the Netherlands, France, and North America during the 18th and early 19th centuries, often characterized as the infrastructure of the Industrial Revolution, depended entirely on horsepower for their operation, with teams of horses walking the towpaths beside the canals and hauling laden barges at a pace that, while slow, was dramatically more energy efficient than road transport. Even the railways, whose introduction in the early 19th century is often presented as the technology that made the horse obsolete in transport, were initially operated in many instances using horse traction. The first railways were simply improvements to the wagonways already used in mining districts, and horse-drawn railway carriages preceded steam locomotion by several decades in many areas. The horse was, in a very real sense, the technological foundation upon which its own eventual replacement was built. The shoeing of horses, the practice of protecting the hoof with a nailed metal plate, represents a technological intervention of antiquity whose development fundamentally expanded the environments in which working horses could be effectively employed and the distances over which they could be sustained in working condition. The hoof, while remarkably tough in its natural state, wears more rapidly than it grows when a horse is worked regularly on hard, abrasive surfaces, stone-paved roads, cobbled city streets, rocky mountain paths, making some form of hoof protection essential for heavy working horses in urban and agricultural contexts. The earliest evidence of hoof protection consists of simple leather hoof boots or tied-on metal plates found in Roman and Iron Age archaeological contexts, but the nailed iron horseshoe, whose geometry has remained essentially unchanged for 1,000 years, appears to have been developed in Europe during the early medieval period, probably between the 8th and 10th centuries CE. The farriery tradition that grew up around horseshoeing combined elements of blacksmithing, the shaping of hot iron, with what we might now recognize as applied biomechanics. The assessment of the horse's foot conformation, gait, and pathological deviations, and the design of shoe modifications intended to correct asymmetrical loading, provide traction in specific conditions, or therapeutically redistribute forces through the foot in cases of injury or disease. The modern farrier, trained in both the craft of metalworking and the science of equine locomotor anatomy, represents the continuation of a professional tradition extending without interruption across more than a millennium. The horse's capacity to form bonds with other animal species, particularly with humans, but also with cattle, donkeys, dogs, and various other companion animals, reflects an attachment behavioral system that evolved in the context of the tight social bonds of the equine herd but is capable of considerable cross-species flexibility when developmental circumstances direct the attachment process toward non-equine social partners. Horses raised in isolation from conspecifics during early sensitive periods reliably form strong attachments to whatever social companion is available, a phenomenon well documented in horses kept as single animals on small properties and bonded to a single human, a goat, a donkey, or even a domestic cat. The physiological consequences of social separation in horses are severe and immediate. Isolation produces elevated heart rate, increased cortisol secretion, heightened stereotypic behavior, reduced appetite, and decreased immune function, demonstrating that the social bond is not merely a behavioral preference but a physiological necessity whose disruption constitutes genuine biological stress. Racing stables have long recognized the calming influence of companion animals on high-strung thoroughbreds, maintaining various stable companions, goats, donkeys, dogs, and occasionally exotic species, whose presence reduces the anxiety and cortisol-mediated immunosuppression that characterize horses subjected to the chronic social disruption of competition travel and stabling in unfamiliar environments. The famous story of the retired champion Seabiscuit being accompanied throughout his career by a pet dog and a former racehorse called Pumpkin is not a sentimental anomaly. It is a reflection of a genuine biological need whose management had practical performance consequences. The history of equine disease. The epidemics of glanders, equine influenza, African horse sickness, equine encephalitis, and strangles that periodically devastated horse populations throughout history, constitutes a biological dimension of human history that has received insufficient attention relative to the better documented human disease epidemics with which it frequently intersected and interacted. Glanders, caused by the bacterium Burkholderia malleae, was a chronically devastating disease of working horses throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, capable of decimating cavalry remount depots and urban draft horse populations with terrible efficiency and at the same time posing a genuine zoonotic threat to the grooms, farriers, and veterinarians who worked in close contact with infected animals. During the American Civil War, equine disease, including glanders and the respiratory condition known as strangles, killed more horses than enemy action, severely compromising the cavalry and artillery capacity of both Union and Confederate forces. The First World War similarly saw enormous equine mortality from disease as well as from combat and overwork, with an estimated 8 million horses dying in the conflict, a number that represents one of the largest mortality events in the history of a single domesticated species and that contributed significantly to the post-war decline of horse-based military and agricultural systems as rational calculation of investment risk in biological capital made mechanical alternatives seem increasingly attractive. The concept of feel in horsemanship, that ineffable quality of sensory acuity and interpretive skill that distinguishes the great horseman from the merely competent rider, has been described, analyzed, celebrated, and lamented across the entire written tradition of equestrian literature without ever being fully captured in language, because it is fundamentally a bodily rather than a verbal knowledge. Great riders across traditions as diverse as Xenophon's Greek cavalry, the Andalusian classical masters, the Comanche buffalo hunters, and the great 20th century trainers Tom Dorrance and Ray Hunt have described the same essential phenomenon in their respective cultural vocabularies. A state of refined somatic awareness in which the rider perceives, through the medium of physical contact, the subtleties of the horse's movement, balance, tension, and attention with a resolution and currency that precedes conscious analysis and allows responsive adjustment in real time. Neuroscience offers a partial account of this phenomenon in terms of proprioceptive learning and the development of predictive motor models, the nervous system learning to predict and prepare for the movement patterns of the horse through repeated experience, allowing what was initially effortful and conscious processing to become automatic and subliminal. But this account leaves something unexplained. The quality of connection that the most skilled horseman describes seems to involve not merely motor efficiency but something closer to empathy, a genuine, moment-to-moment attunement to the experiential state of another being. Whether this is best understood as neuroscience, as phenomenology, or as something else entirely remains an open and fascinating question. The horse in the mythology and spiritual traditions of cultures around the world reveals a consistent association between the horse and the liminal, the threshold between worlds, between life and death, between the human and the divine. In Norse mythology, Odin's eight-legged horse Sleipnir, born of the trickster Loki in mare form and the stallion Svalfari, carried its rider between the 9 worlds of the Norse cosmological map, including the realm of the dead, serving as a vehicle of shamanic journey between states of existence not accessible by any ordinary means. In Hindu tradition, the horse is associated with both the sun god Surya, whose chariot is drawn by 7 horses representing the 7 colors of visible light, and with Hayagriva, a horse-headed avatar of Vishnu associated with wisdom and the preservation of sacred knowledge. The Celtic Epona, a goddess depicted riding a horse or accompanied by horses and associated with fertility, sovereignty, and the otherworld journey, was so widely worshipped across the Roman Empire that she became the only Gallic deity to be formally adopted into the Roman pantheon. The Trojan horse of Greek legend, a structure of deception rather than a living animal, nevertheless deploys the horse's symbolic associations with sacred power to explain why the Trojans, who were themselves dedicated horsemen, might have accepted within their walls an offering of such suspicious dimensions. In each of these mythological contexts, the horse transcends its role as a domesticated utility animal and becomes a being of cosmic significance. The work of the ethologist Lucy Rees, the animal behaviorist Martha Kiley Worthington, and the trainer and author Tom Dorrance in the 20th century collectively articulated a vision of the horse-human relationship that has been increasingly validated by subsequent scientific research, a vision in which the horse is understood not as a prey animal to be dominated through human mastery of its fear responses, but as a social partner capable of genuine communication, reciprocal learning, and something approaching voluntary cooperation when the interaction is organized around respect for the horse's perceptual world and behavioral needs. Dorrance's foundational insight, that the horse's apparent resistance to human demands is most often an expression of confusion or anxiety rather than disobedience, and that the primary educational task facing the human is to make the desired response easy and clear for the horse to understand rather than the undesired response painful or frightening to repeat, represents a Copernican shift in the fundamental logic of horse training. The approach, subsequently popularized under the label natural horsemanship by practitioners including Pat Pirelli, Clinton Anderson, and Monty Roberts, has been criticized for oversimplification and commercialization, but its central insight, that horses respond better to reward-based learning protocols that work with their natural communication systems rather than against them, is now supported by substantial experimental evidence from the fields of comparative psychology and behavioral pharmacology. The neuroscience of the horse-human bond has emerged as a legitimate and productive field of inquiry that draws on the conceptual frameworks of social neuroscience, affective neuroscience, and comparative cognition to investigate the neurobiological substrates of what horse people have been describing in experiential terms for thousands of years. The oxytocin system, a neuropeptide network that in mammals coordinates affiliative social behavior, attachment formation, and the positive effect associated with social bonding, has been implicated in horse-human interaction through measurements of urinary and blood oxytocin levels in both horses and their human handlers during positive interaction sessions. Studies have found that mutual grooming-like interactions, in which humans stroke or scratch horses in the preferred areas identified by observations of conspecific grooming, produce oxytocin increases in horses measurably greater than those produced by simple proximity or verbal interaction, suggesting that the tactile component of human-horse interaction activates the same neurochemical substrates as the affiliative tactile behavior of natural social bonding within horse herds. The implications of this finding extend in multiple directions simultaneously. For the welfare of horses managed in ways that restrict social contact and affiliative behavior, for the mechanisms through which equine-assisted therapy achieves its physiological effects on human participants, and for our understanding of the degree to which domestication has genuinely reconfigured the neurochemical landscape of the horse's social bonding system to include human partners as valid attachment figures. The concept of feel in horsemanship, that ineffable quality of sensory acuity and interpretive skill that distinguishes the great horseman from the merely competent rider, has been described, analyzed, celebrated, and lamented across the entire written tradition of equestrian literature without ever being fully captured in language, because it is fundamentally a bodily rather than a verbal knowledge. Great riders across traditions as diverse as Xenophon's Greek cavalry, the Andalusian classical masters, the Comanche buffalo hunters, and the great 20th century trainers Tom Dorrance and Ray Hunt have described the same essential phenomenon in their respective cultural vocabularies, a state of refined somatic awareness in which the rider perceives, through the medium of physical contact, the subtleties of the horse's movement, balance, tension, and attention with a resolution and currency that precedes conscious analysis and allows responsive adjustment in real time. Neuroscience offers a partial account of this phenomenon in terms of proprioceptive learning and the development of predictive motor models, the nervous system learning to predict and prepare for the movement patterns of the horse through repeated experience, allowing what was initially effortful and conscious processing to become automatic and subliminal. But this account leaves something unexplained. The quality of connection that the most skilled horseman describes seems to involve not merely motor efficiency but something closer to empathy, a genuine, moment-to-moment attunement to the experiential state of another being. Whether this is best understood as neuroscience, as phenomenology, or as something else entirely remains an open and fascinating question. The horse in the mythology and spiritual traditions of cultures around the world reveals a consistent association between the horse and the liminal, the threshold between worlds, between life and death, between the human and the divine. In Norse mythology, Odin's eight-legged horse Sleipnir, born of the trickster Loki in mare form and the stallion Svalfari, carried its rider between the 9 worlds of the Norse cosmological map, including the realm of the dead, serving as a vehicle of shamanic journey between states of existence not accessible by any ordinary means. In Hindu tradition, the horse is associated with both the sun god Surya, whose chariot is drawn by 7 horses representing the 7 colors of visible light, and with Hayagriva, a horse-headed avatar of Vishnu associated with wisdom and the preservation of sacred knowledge. The Celtic Epona, a goddess depicted riding a horse or accompanied by horses and associated with fertility, sovereignty, and the otherworld journey, was so widely worshipped across the Roman Empire that she became the only Gallic deity to be formally adopted into the Roman pantheon. The Trojan horse of Greek legend, a structure of deception rather than a living animal, nevertheless deploys the horse's symbolic associations with sacred power to explain why the Trojans, who were themselves dedicated horsemen, might have accepted within their walls an offering of such suspicious dimensions. In each of these mythological contexts, the horse transcends its role as a domesticated utility animal and becomes a being of cosmic significance. The work of the ethologist Lucy Rees, the animal behaviorist Martha Kiley Worthington, and the trainer and author Tom Dorrance in the 20th century collectively articulated a vision of the horse-human relationship that has been increasingly validated by subsequent scientific research, a vision in which the horse is understood not as a prey animal to be dominated through human mastery of its fear responses, but as a social partner capable of genuine communication, reciprocal learning, and something approaching voluntary cooperation when the interaction is organized around respect for the horse's perceptual world and behavioral needs. Dorrance's foundational insight, that the horse's apparent resistance to human demands is most often an expression of confusion or anxiety rather than disobedience, and that the primary educational task facing the human is to make the desired response easy and clear for the horse to understand rather than the undesired response painful or frightening to repeat, represents a Copernican shift in the fundamental logic of horse training. The approach, subsequently popularized under the label natural horsemanship by practitioners including Pat Pirelli, Clinton Anderson, and Monty Roberts, has been criticized for oversimplification and commercialization, but its central insight, that horses respond better to reward-based learning protocols that work with their natural communication systems rather than against them, is now supported by substantial experimental evidence from the fields of comparative psychology and behavioral pharmacology. The neuroscience of the horse-human bond has emerged as a legitimate and productive field of inquiry that draws on the conceptual frameworks of social neuroscience, affective neuroscience, and comparative cognition to investigate the neurobiological substrates of what horse people have been describing in experiential terms for thousands of years. The oxytocin system, a neuropeptide network that in mammals coordinates affiliative social behavior, attachment formation, and the positive effect associated with social bonding, has been implicated in horse-human interaction through measurements of urinary and blood oxytocin levels in both horses and their human handlers during positive interaction sessions. Studies have found that mutual grooming-like interactions, in which humans stroke or scratch horses in the preferred areas identified by observations of conspecific grooming, produce oxytocin increases in horses measurably greater than those produced by simple proximity or verbal interaction, suggesting that the tactile component of human-horse interaction activates the same neurochemical substrates as the affiliative tactile behavior of natural social bonding within horse herds. The implications of this finding extend in multiple directions simultaneously, for the welfare of horses managed in ways that restrict social contact and affiliative behavior, for the mechanisms through which equine-assisted therapy achieves its physiological effects on human participants, and for our understanding of the degree to which domestication has genuinely reconfigured the neurochemical landscape of the horse's social bonding system to include human partners as valid attachment figures. The philosophical dimensions of the horse-human relationship have attracted the attention of thinkers from Plato, who used the charioteer managing two horses of different temperament as his central metaphor for the soul's management of reason and passion in the Phaedrus, to Nietzsche, whose famous mental collapse in Turin in 1889 was reportedly triggered by the sight of a horse being beaten in the street and who subsequently addressed the horse as a fellow sufferer in his final, lucid letter. The horse appears in Descartes' philosophy as a paradigm case of the automaton, a being of mechanical complexity but no inner experience, a view whose descendants persist in the behaviorist traditions that dominated academic psychology for much of the 20th century. The alternative philosophical tradition, from Montaigne's skepticism about human pretensions to cognitive uniqueness through Schopenhauer's sympathy for animal suffering to contemporary philosophers of mind like Mark Rowlands, who argues for genuine animal consciousness and moral status, has consistently found in the horse a compelling instance of the case for animal mind, precisely because the intimacy of the horse-human relationship makes it so phenomenologically obvious to experienced participants that there is someone genuinely home behind those large, luminous eyes. The question of what it is like to be a horse, following Thomas Nagel's famous formulation, is not merely a philosophical curiosity but an ethical imperative, because how we answer it determines what we owe these animals and what constraints their interests should place upon our use of them. The domestication of the horse was not a single event but a process, an ongoing, never fully completed negotiation between the behavioral capacities of a wild prey animal and the social, economic, and aesthetic demands of successive human cultures. This negotiation has produced, over 5,000 years, an animal that is in many important respects genuinely different from its wild ancestor, more tolerant of human proximity and handling, more responsive to learned cues, more capable of suppressing certain fear responses in contexts where suppression is repeatedly reinforced, but that remains in its fundamental behavioral biology the product of millions of years of evolution as a prey animal in open country. The persistent tensions between this evolutionary inheritance and the conditions of modern horse management, confinement, social isolation, restricted movement, feeding patterns incompatible with the continuous trickle feeding the digestive system was designed for, are the source of most of the behavioral and physical pathologies that plague contemporary horse populations. The aspiration of the most thoughtful contemporary horsemen and equine scientists is not the further domestication of the horse, the further suppression or modification of its fundamental nature, but rather a more intelligent accommodation of human purposes to equine nature, designing management systems, training methodologies, and competitive environments that recognize and respect what the horse fundamentally is, rather than treating its natural behavioral repertoire as an obstacle to be overcome. The sensory world of the horse, the Umwelt, in Jacob von Uexküll's evocative term, is a subjective universe assembled from perceptual inputs and filtered through attentional and emotional systems so different from our own that we can only approximate its character through careful scientific investigation and sustained empathetic imagination. A horse standing at the edge of a pasture at dawn experiences a world in which the panoramic periphery of its visual field is monitored simultaneously for movement, the rustle of a predator in distant grass, the approach of a herd member from behind, while the ears rotate independently toward sound sources positioned behind and to either side, and the nostrils sample the chemical composition of the dawn air for the sense of known companions, unfamiliar horses, the territorial markings of other species, and the faint, complex olfactory signature of rain approaching from the west. Its proprioceptive awareness of its own body, the precise position of each limb, the tension in each muscle and tendon, the quality of the ground beneath each hoof, is continuously updated through a network of mechanoreceptors of extraordinary sensitivity, allowing the horse to detect subtle changes in surface quality that might signal unstable footing. And underlying all of this continuous sensory processing is an emotional state, a moment-by-moment fluctuation of arousal, attention, and effect that integrates all incoming information with the accumulated history of prior experience to produce the horse's behavioral response to its world. To engage with this animal genuinely is to attempt, however partially and imperfectly, to step outside the boundaries of one's own perceptual universe and acknowledge the reality of another. The future of the horse in human civilization is being shaped by forces that would have been unrecognizable to any previous generation of horsemen: genomic engineering technologies capable of targeted modification of the equine genome, artificial reproductive technologies that allow the genetic material of elite athletes to be propagated far beyond what natural reproduction would permit, sophisticated sensor technologies that continuously monitor the physiological state of working horses, and the growing intersection of equestrian culture with the digital technologies of social media, virtual reality, and data analytics. The prospect of genomic editing, using CRISPR, Cas9 or analogous technologies to introduce or modify specific genetic variants in the equine genome, raises profound questions about the boundaries of selective breeding, the definition of authenticity in sport horse populations, and the appropriate relationship between scientific capacity and ethical restraint in the modification of animal genomes. Artificial insemination and embryo transfer, already widely used in many breeds, allow a single mare to produce dozens of offspring per year rather than the one that natural reproduction would permit, dramatically accelerating the rate of genetic change within breeding populations but simultaneously concentrating genetic diversity around a small number of elite individuals in ways that may increase the long-term fragility of breed genomes. The integration of continuous physiological monitoring, accelerometers, heart rate monitors, GPS tracking, strain gauges embedded in shoes, into the routine management of competition horses is producing datasets of unprecedented resolution that promise to transform our understanding of the physical demands of equestrian sport, the early detection of incipient injury, and the optimization of training and recovery protocols. The horse stands today at a paradox of relevance, simultaneously more studied, more cared for, and more scientifically understood than at any previous moment in its relationship with humanity, and yet in many respects more removed from its fundamental nature than at any prior time. The working horse of the medieval agricultural village, however poorly fed and ruthlessly worked by our standards, lived a life organized around movement, social contact, and the expression of species-typical behaviors to an extent that the modern competition horse, stabled individually for 22 hours per day, may not. The expansion of scientific understanding of equine cognition, emotion, and behavioral biology that has characterized the past 30 years has not yet been fully translated into the management practices of mainstream equestrian culture, a gap between knowledge and practice that represents one of the central ethical challenges of the contemporary horse world. Yet there is genuine reason for optimism. The growing integration of equine behavioral science into veterinary education, the development of welfare assessment frameworks that provide concrete guidance for management decisions, and the emergence of a generation of equestrians explicitly committed to evidence-based, horse-centered approaches to training and care suggest that the relationship between the human species and the horse is entering a new phase, one in which the accumulated wisdom of 5,000 years of intimate practical experience is being deepened and refined by scientific understanding, and in which the horse is increasingly recognized not merely as an animal in service to human purposes but as a being with experiences, preferences, and interests that deserve serious moral consideration. And so we arrive, at last, at the place where the story of the horse and the story of humanity converge in the present tense, two species bound together by a partnership of extraordinary depth and duration, navigating a world transformed almost beyond recognition from the open steppe where it began. The 55 million years of evolutionary preparation, the geological epochs of morphological refinement, the 10,000 years of domestication, the 5,000 years of shared history, all of this immense temporal depth is present in every encounter between a human being and a horse, in the widening of those enormous, lambent eyes at an unfamiliar sound, in the flicker of the ear toward a half-heard footstep, in the soft exhalation of warm breath against a palm. The horse has carried us across continents, through wars, along trade routes, into the imaginations of artists and the philosophical speculations of thinkers, and into whatever it is that lies beyond the boundaries of our own species' perceptual world. It has given us, in return for its labor and its trust, something we have not always been wise enough to recognize as the gift it is. A window large and luminous as the eye of a horse at dawn, into a world of experience and intelligence and feeling that is not our own. A reminder that consciousness, in this universe, takes more forms than we have yet learned to fully see.